Hello, hello, welcome. It has been a while. So, I've been a little bit busy with terrain making. I've been trying to turn what I had into 3D without changing the two-dimensional workflow that I had before. So what do I mean by that? The two-dimensional workflow that I had before was essentially you still had provinces, each province was a mesh, and there was a collision shape that is generated from that mesh. And as you can see, they're still individual meshes. And the borders that I have here are still individual meshes. Let me just zoom out a little bit further, as you can see. And yeah, I mean, the reason why I wanted it is because it gives it a little bit of a more nicer flow. Like, I mean, I always wanted to make a three-dimensional map, right? Things are still a bit rough on the edges, but I can improve that as time passes, right? Like I can make a material that you know, that slightly gradients out these edges so it doesn't look like so rugged on it, right? But that's polish. I think for now it proves that I can make three-dimensional maps and still keep the same workflow, right? For I can still go here, change the ownership of a given province very easily, right? Which makes me quite happy. And everything still works fairly the same, right? Like you still have your armies, you still have your cities, and so on and so forth, right? One thing that you might be noticing is that the density, as you can see, of this is quite high. Yes, density is quite high, and I do need to work on that, but all of this is generated, right? So I can always tweak this outside of Godot, which I'll be showing you how I generate these meshes. Yeah, but before going to Houdini, which is where I show these, I just want to show you my idea with painting this map. So currently I'm working with a gradient. So the idea is that you have a climate gradient, which is this thing over here. And for example, if you look at this, if I take the terrain mesh and move it up and down, you see that I'm applying like different variations. So this is what I call the climate gradient. And I have a texture that I overlay on top of it, a single texture. So the idea is that I have certain sets of textures based on height. So this is what happens, right? Like, so you have a gradient that you apply based on the height, and then I take that gradient and then I use corresponding texture. So for example, for mountains, areas that are high altitude, I use a rock texture. For areas that are low altitude, like near the beach, I use like a beach texture, right? And here is grasslands, or, you know, I can then also swap climates. So for example, I can also have potentially a climate texture in the future where this tells me that this is desert, and then being desert, it means that I apply the desert gradient, right? So yeah, but that's the future thing, and I think this is just a very basic way of like tweaking where the mountains are, as you can see, right? Yeah, this is a very simplistic, right? Usually in a normal process you would have an artist that would paint and sculpt a map, but since I'm no artist, I got to resort to like a few more simple tools, right? And I think this is a simple way of getting an okay result. This is by no means perfect, right? So yeah, so this is how it looks in Godot, right? How do you actually generate this mesh? So you generate this mesh in Houdini, and let's just start from the very beginning. So as I showed you in my previous 2D, how to make 2D maps, you start with a basic texture, a black and white texture with the provinces. Now I've just added a height map texture, which, as you can see here, and essentially now you need two, right? So if you want to just have a 2D map, you need this one. If you want a 3D map, you just add a height map on top of it, right? And now I'm going to explain what Houdini does with these two textures effectively. Yeah, so welcome to Houdini. So before, the 2D workflow it just stopped here is the first node. So you just have a trace node, and as you can see, you have your provinces generated as individual meshes, and then you can just export geometry right here, and then you're done, right? So now, how do you turn this into a 3D map effectively? So one of the first things that you need to do is you need to generate a lot more faces or vertices, because you need to offset them by the height map. And if you would apply the 2D offset here, you would not get much far. So one of the things that you need to do is you need to have a resample node followed up by a remesh node. And the remesh node essentially, as you can see, remeshes everything with a much more dense set of vertices that will allow you to offset them later on, right? So yeah, so you have your trace. So yeah, so just recapping from the very beginning, you have your texture. You take this texture, you apply this texture on the trace node, which is this one. Then you remesh, which is this node here, which means that you can now offset it. And then through an attribute from map node and attribute VOP node, you can have the displacement along normal node, which effectively will use this texture as the height map. And if you visualize the final result, this is what you get, right? You get all those vertices, as you can see, offsetted. And there's one thing you can also do, right? I can scale this up as much as I want, right? And you can do even further, like the sky's the limit here. Like Houdini has a lot of interesting things you can apply. You can apply noise effects, you can randomize values, you can just apply fractal values on these things to make it look a little bit more natural. This is just my first experiment with this workflow, right? So after all of this, what you do is pretty simple. Like you just right click this node, you just save geometry, and then you will save this geometry. And when you import it into Blender, you will have essentially this. Let me just put this into, there we go. So you have your individual provinces. Let's just take this. There you go. You have our individual provinces, and a little bit more. I can also explain. I had to do a little bit of things in Blender to sort of like get the borders, but you get the point, right? Like this is still the same process. Once you get into Blender, you can just apply and do whatever you want to this mesh, because these are both individual meshes, and this thing is also separate, as you can see. Yeah, once you got this into a blend scene, you can just literally import it into Godot, and there you go. This is where you have, right? So okay, now that I got this working, I can do as many 3D maps that I want. Currently, it's sitting around at, let's just check how many provinces this has. 725 provinces. Another cool thing that I can show you is now I can have island provinces, which I couldn't do it before, which is quite cool. As you can see, this province is made of that and that separately. It means I can, for example, create a province in the Greek islands, which is made of several meshes that I merge in Blender, and then that essentially becomes a single province. So I'm quite happy about that. But anyways, now that I got this, the next steps are essentially to improve the edginess of this borders, because I quite like it. It looks a bit too harsh. I mean, it's pretty simple. What I want to do is to essentially apply a material to the borders, right? So if I hide the borders, as you can see, so I want to do two things. I want to smooth out the provinces, so I apply a shader gradient between these edges. And I want to apply the same gradient to this border mesh that I have here through a material shader. And that should improve the quality of these edges by quite a bit, I believe. The thing that I want to do next is to work on climate as well, so that, like North Africa is more arid, maybe with this type of rocky texture, and then, the Iberian Peninsula is more green and lush, and then the Nordic areas are more cold, But yeah, so this is the current state of it. I know it has taken me a while to upload something, but I've been busy with other things. But as always, thank you for watching, and see you next time.